Hi, this is Mark Farnham with Apologetics for the Church and a special edition of our Every Believer Confident podcast. Across from me is not Jeff Mindler, who would like to be here but can't.
Okay.
But this is Dr. Mark Draper, who is a history professor here at Lancaster Bible College and also the director of the library. And tell us a little bit about yourself before we get into our discussion.
Yeah. Well, I'm originally from Philadelphia. Living out here in Lancaster
you for
now.
that.
Yeah, okay, that's all right. I'm an Eagles fan too. That might get me in trouble. But I didn't spit on anybody.
Okay,
so
that's good.
Let's see. My background is in church history. I've done did a lot of study in that. Of course, I have the library science degree, so that's taught me how to do some research. And yeah, I live up in Lebanon County. So I live in
You're a big time, they don't call it road biking, do they? What do they call it?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I do a lot of cycling. Yeah, I do a lot of cycling. I do a lot of cycling. Yeah, that's where I clear my head and have my deep thoughts.
Good.
So, yeah.
Well, Mark has joined us today because he also teaches classes such as, what are the classes you're teaching this
Christianity
semester?
and culture. This semester, I'm also teaching a class on World War I and World War II.
So one class combined both wars.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we're taking that class down to the Holocaust Museum in November as part of that course.
Good.
Yeah, I've taught stuff on the Civil War, of course, church history. So yeah, lots of different stuff.
Good. As a historian, Mark is an excellent person to run by issues of our day. In fact, whenever anything interesting happens in the world, we tend to end up talking or texting because Mark has a certain historical perspective where he can connect things in our day with things that have happened in the past and provide some perspective. So the subject of this video in mid-September 2025 is the political assassination, if we want to call it that. I think it's an assassination of Charlie Kirk, the CEO of Turning Point USA on the campus of Utah Valley University, just this week by a sniper's bullet from about 200 yards away, killed him almost instantly as he was preparing to do his usual dialogue with college students. And of course, many people in our country are quite torn up about this, whether they agreed with Charlie Kirk on what he had to say or not. Others are taking You'll notice in this interview that Mark will be moderate and I will not. Others are taking a sick glee in the execution of this man in front of his family for the position that he held on various issues. So let's just start talking about how do we process this? How do we look at this? Is it an assassination?
Yeah, I mean, what we were saying off camera is as of this date, the FBI has somebody arrested for this. So that's going to be a lot. What caused this? What's going on? What was the motivation? That kind of thing. With the assassination attempt in Pennsylvania with Donald Trump, we don't really know what the motivation was, right?
Yeah, we didn't let the guy live long enough to ask him a question.
Yeah, so that's sort of just, we're kind of left in limbo with that. So we'll be curious to see, of course, now that they have this person, they'll certainly go through their social media files. They've already started doing that. And you might start to get a picture, a composite picture of who this person is.
I've read that the difference between murder and assassination is that murder is done of a public individual with the express purpose of sending a political message. So it's not outside the realm of possibility, especially considering Charlie Kirk's public stance on things that go very much against the public mood these days, that this could have, we could properly term this an assassination.
Yeah, well, and of course, when it happened, everybody, the media, the politicians, they sort of leaned that way, didn't they? They sort of felt like this is they right away they went to, we need to turn down the heat on political rhetoric, right? And they did the same thing when President Trump was nearly assassinated.
Right.
And so and again, there's been a laundry list of events that have taken place over the last 5 to 6 years that it's some sort of political violence. I mean, that's a language that you were now seeing in the media, political violence. And maybe this kind of provides some perspective of why I'm a little more moderate about it. Is being a historian, you've seen this before, right? You haven't just seen it, you didn't live through it, but you've studied this, and you start to see certain trends and sort of things. And yeah, America's been through this before at other times in our history when the political temperature was very high.
Yeah, talk about some of those briefly. What would be a good comparison to today?
Yeah, well, I mean, the most recent probably would be before I was born, but in '68. When Dr. King was assassinated, when Bobby Kennedy was assassinated, and George Wallace was even shot, but ended up in a wheelchair. And so the late '60s, early '70s was just a very politically violent time. You also had the National Guard shooting of protesters at Kent State.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a really turbulent time. And
I wonder if any of the students who end up watching this, because we're primarily filming this for our students, but for other Christians as well, if they would be familiar with the fact that protests got so out of hand on universities around the country that the National Guard was ordered in, and at Kent State University, as protesters were throwing things at the National Guardsmen, several guardsmen fired, and several students died at the hands of United States soldiers. It was, well, I always perceived that as something that turned the corner on what was going on in the U.S., that it led toward greater acceptance of protests, or maybe it calmed the protests down because people said there's got to be a better way to go about this. I don't know. What was the end result of that?
Well, I mean, you could also look at it within a year or two, the war in Vietnam's over, right? '75, you see the pictures of the ambassadors in the helicopter in Saigon, and that's no longer an issue, right? So that could be part of it as well.
Which was the war in Saigon or in Vietnam was one of the primary reasons that protests were the way they were.
Yeah,
and riots
it wasn't just the war, right? There was changes going on in the culture, on gender, sexuality.
Yeah.
In some cases, you can see whenever there's debates in culture about who's part of the society, who's not part of the society, what it means to be human, the temperature goes up. And so I think that's what we're dealing with now in some regards. And then I think the big one really would be the American Civil War. And I also don't want to skip over a number of civil rights people were killed, people like Emmett Till, even as a child, right? That went on as well, other than Dr. King. But then you get into the years leading up to the Civil War. Like I told you, we were talking 1837. We have a white Presbyterian pastor murdered in Illinois because he has an abolitionist newspaper. We have Charles Sumner, the senator from Massachusetts, nearly beaten to death by a congressman from South Carolina.
I've seen the political cartoons of that event.
Right. Yeah, that's right. It became and of course, Brooks broke his cane over Sumner's head, and his constituency sent him new canes in the mail to thank him. And then, of course, and then you have the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, which is certainly a political violence, right?
Sure.
That was something that John Wilkes Booth was very clear about, right? He wasn't pulling any punches on that. So we've had this, right?
Yeah.
We've had this. McKinley shot by an anarchist. So we've had political violence in the past. So it's not new. It's not a new thing, and it never sort of minimizes what's taken place now. You can't just say, oh, well, that happens. Sorry. We still have to grieve it. We still have to process it. But that is part of what we've gone through.
Before we started recording, I mentioned something that I read online since the time of Luigi Mangione this summer. Was it this last summer or sometime in the last year?
Yeah.
Basically waiting for and murdering a healthcare executive in New York City. And the reaction, because of the way healthcare works and so many claims denied so that the company can make millions for their shareholders, the elevation of Luigi Mangione to saint status in the eyes of some people has kind of crystallized. I don't want to say that created this atmosphere where, hey, take out someone that we all perceive as wicked and you'll be made a saint. But it certainly has personified this mood in our country among some people that the people we oppose, you would be justified in killing them.
Yeah. The political language is just different. So when I was a kid, when Ronald Reagan was assassinated, um, that was didn't seem like it was political, right? It
Mm,
seemed like the person had mental illness and was in love with Jodie Foster and things like that. But the political climate was different, I think, in the '80s, where Reagan and the Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, could fight like cats and dogs,
mm,
but then at the end they would still go out and have dinner at night.
right.
There was a sense, and again, there was also an existential threat America faced at that time, and it was the Cold War.
Yeah.
And
Russia.
so, right, exactly. And so, nobody, the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, were they pro Soviet Union. They
Mm,
were all opposed to the Soviet Union. They were all, in a sense, Cold Warriors on some extent, maybe with some exceptions. But the debates were over other things, right? But a lot has changed since that existential threat's been taken off the page, and beginning in the '90s, and it seems like it almost it's the fall of the Soviet Union and the birth of the internet happened almost at the same time,
very true. Yeah.
and things start to change. The way we communicate, the way we associate with each other, has changed because of the medium we're using to do it.
That's right. A recent Rutgers poll revealed that up to 56% of, if I remember correctly, people on the left, but it might not have been specifically on the left, but stated that it would be morally justifiable to assassinate or to kill a public figure if you perceive them to be a threat to democracy. Is that a unique situation where we've moved from opposition and resistance and political action to now we're getting to the point where, yes, killing someone, murdering someone, assassinating someone would be okay because we perceive them to be such a threat?
Yeah, I mean, I keep thinking of, say, like the John Brown raid on
Mm,
Harper's Ferry, right? But that there's a sense of I'm going to start an insurrection.
right.
So you like, and you've had other cases of this. I think now we're playing such a zero sum game. Again, in the 1960s was a zero sum game for a lot of people. The 1860s, 1850s certainly were a
Yeah,
zero sum.
absolutely. Yeah.
And we've been playing a zero sum. It's not, well, Tip O'Neill's a Democrat, I'm a Republican. We have different views on things. It sort of becomes, well, you're not American,
Right.
right? You're opposed to the American experiment, and I'm for the American experiment. And that's kind of a different thing. That's a newer thing. That's sort of vitriol going back between parties and peoples. I think the other piece too of this that makes this more difficult and much easier to be partisan is the sort of the bubble we can live in now in our communication world. I would imagine that a lot of people from our sphere, in LBC sphere, their social media feed was filled with stories about Kirk's assassination.
Hmm.
But I can also see a situation where somebody is, I don't know, they're not a conservative Christian, or their interests are different, and it might show up if they happen to like NBC News or something. But it might not just be. So my feed was just filled
Hmm.
with that. And so I think sometimes that plays a role too, the algorithm and that type of thing. Where before we would read it in the newspaper. You read the same story I read in the
Yeah,
Inquirer
that's
or the
true.
Daily News or the New York Times. And you would talk about it. Hey, did you see this story? And we all knew, oh, well, the Wall Street Journal is a little more conservative than this paper.
Hmm.
But we were reading the same stories. Right now, we might not be reading the same bloggers and same authors at all. And it all has to do with how the algorithm is set up.
Yeah.
And I think that plays part of it too.
I think you're right. I correspond or talk with someone on the polar opposite of the political spectrum as me. So I'm very conservative without apology. This person who I love is very liberal. And when he brings up issues about the world, I'm like, where are you getting these from?
Yes.
And I have never heard of that. And when I mention the things that I'm concerned about, he's completely unfamiliar with them.
Yep.
And so I do think the algorithms separate us and I don't know if this is intentional, but we are almost living in two different worlds where my main concerns, I'm thinking, how can everyone not see these? And
Yep.
he's thinking the same thing about totally different things.
And it didn't even show up on your feed.
No,
That's something that's troubling him.
no.
And that's it, right? And I think we're probably more likely to communicate with people online today than even our neighbor next door.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I grew up in a city. You couldn't have kind of avoid that. But now that I live in the country, I don't really have to talk to my neighbors. But yeah, so I think that's a big part of it, right? That's in fact, there's a weird statistic that the last thing that all Americans tend to watch together is the Super Bowl. Like we don't watch the same TV shows even, right? There's no must-see TV anymore every on Thursday night. And so I think that's part of it. We've really have been able to become partisan in the way that technology is operated. One thing I also want to add to sort of intellectually, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party are not the parties they were in 1980.
No, that's for
Right.
sure.
I mean, Donald Trump is not a Ronald Reagan conservative. The Democratic Party is, John Kennedy would almost look like a member of the John Birch Society today.
Right. He'd be a radical conservative.
Exactly. And so you don't have those same ideologies driving that. I think Charlie Kirk really saw himself as sort of a Reagan Republican. He talked in that way. But you don't have that. You don't have that sort of dialogue taking place. And you don't have those sort of ideologies that people are married to. We don't even have liberals anymore, right? We don't have a classic liberal anymore.
No, not classic liberals. Yeah.
We just don't. So that's what's new.
Right. And I think that's part of what has led to such a polarization is the left has gone so radically left in the areas of abortion up to the moment of birth and the transgender movement, which even I've been reading some conservative gay sources that are opposed to that. And then you have the radical right. But I have to be honest with you, I don't think I know anybody in the radical right, but I know people in the radical left personally. So I know they exist, but none of the conservatives I know would qualify for that description. And it seems like the issues are becoming, and I think what raises the temperature so much is the issues are becoming matters of life and death when it comes to abortion, when it comes to the transitioning of children surgically or chemically in the transgender movement in our world today. So I think that is part of what has raised the temperature is that people feel like my position is saving lives. Your position is taking lives.
Yeah.
Right? As a conservative, I would say my position is saving lives. I'm opposing abortion.
Yeah.
I'm opposing the transition of minors. I don't think anyone should transition, but certainly opposing the transition of minors because it simply can't be done. And you mar and you scar young people for the rest of their lives. But those on the other side see me as contributing to transgender suicide. Yeah. LGBTQ suicide. They see me as contributing to increase in prenatal deaths and pregnancy-related deaths, that if I'm not allowing women to have abortions, then I'm going to prevent someone with an ectopic pregnancy from having surgery, which is not true. But that's where that fervor comes from, that we both feel like, in one sense, we're on opposite sides of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
The other side is Hitler. By the way, have you heard of Godwin's Law?
No.
Godwin's Law is the amount of time it takes for one side to call the other side a Nazi.
And now that's probably down to like seconds.
Yes, seconds, yeah.
That's the trump card.
Right. While Godwin's Law was originally formulated for Usenet discussions in the 90s, the phenomenon it describes has been widely applied to other forms of online. It's when arguments escalate. The question is, who's going to call the other one Nazi first? And how long will it take in the discussion? And I think I was not until recently that familiar with Charlie Kirk. I've seen reels and a few short videos. But as an apologist, the more I watched him, the more I was impressed at how winsome he was in welcoming people to say whatever they want and to challenge him, and his defense of his position. What I loved was it was so clear and cut and dried, whereas I know many, many conservative people that feel the need to constantly qualify what they say.
Yeah.
So they can't speak clearly. Are you against abortion? well, yes, but, and I just want to make sure. And Kirk was super clear,
Yep.
but in his positions on transgenderism, on abortion, and on things like DEI and woke and all that, he aroused a lot of anger.
So maybe this will help some people watching this to
Move a
sort
little
of
closer to the mic.
to maybe say, like, when we say the Republican Party and the right and the left are not what they were. I think the left of the 60s and even the 70s and even into the 80s in America was, Rousseau, Voltaire, out of the Enlightenment kind of left. But something changed in the 90s. And now I would say the left is more Frankfurt School. And for the historic background, this is a movement that comes out of Germany in between World War I and World War II during the Weimar Republic.
Yeah.
And not only that, I think even if the more I study that period, even their ideas of sexual liberation. I mean, to say that in the 1920s there were people promoting gay liberation in Germany, that is quite avant-garde for the 1920s.
Absolutely.
But that's the milieu that was going on in Germany in the 20s and 30s in the years before the war. And then, of course, World War II happens. But it seems as if in the 60s, those ideas resurrected, at least in America.
Right.
Right. And somewhere along the line in the 2000s, things changed.
Yeah, it went mainstream.
It did. And you started hearing people say things like, oh, well, that's late stage capitalism, or that's a power play, or that's that. And that was new, right? That was new. And so in some cases, the right today is a reaction to that. Because that's changed. So that, I think that might be part of it too.
Explain what you mean. The right is a reaction to that.
So
I mean, the right has to react to that.
Exactly. Right. So, but you can't use the same playbook that you used in the 80s, right? Okay. You can't just use Reagan, because Reagan is sort of pushing GATS against maybe Keynesian economics and things like that. Now the debate is with Horkheimer and a whole different, exactly, a whole different batch of people. And how do you respond to that? And that's kind of what's changed, right? That the left is using a different playbook than they were using.
And I don't think most people realize, because I certainly didn't, because it is so academic and so obscure, the impetus of the left these days, the Frankfurt School, is so radical. It's so much more radical than anything we could ever imagine. Because when you actually read Foucault and you read Gramsci and you read these other guys, Judith Butler, they are wanting to do away. Well, I'm a big student of Friedrich Nietzsche, as you know. I read his works in depth, carefully. Nietzsche's whole project was, let's do away with every last vestige of the Christian worldview.
Yeah.
And that's what all these people have done. And they are trying to make that to the point where there is zero difference between male and female and interchangeable. And no one is made in the image of God. Therefore, you are what we tell you are, what you imagine yourself to be. And I don't think I realized as a Christian and as a thinker, the radical nature of what they would do if they could get away with it.
Yeah, and what's fascinating, even in preparing for this class in World War II, World War I, is that, fascism and Marxism use the same methods.
Of course, yeah.
Right. And oftentimes against each other.
Yeah, Dennis Prager has a great video that says they're not much different from each other.
Yeah, I mean, they might be different in their outlook, but they're sort of the ends justify the means, that kind of thing. Yeah, that does jive up if you look at, say, the Nazi revolution or the fascist revolution of Spain and Italy, and compare that to the Russian Revolution or even the French Revolution.
Yeah.
You start to see, and that was a book I had to read in college. It was a book comparing the American, Russian, and French revolutions. And it was very insightful in that, right? Because the American Revolution, I always say it's almost a tickle fight compared to what goes on in these other spaces, because it is still tethered to a Judeo-Christian worldview.
Right. Both saw themselves as given their commission by the Christian God.
Yeah. And they had to debate, what do I do with Romans 13?
Right.
You don't have to do that in the French Revolution. You don't have to do that in the Russian Revolution. And you certainly don't have to do we in the Nazi Revolution of the 1930s. So I think that's different. That's a different piece. And so I think, and the other thing too, Mark, I think is because we teach undergrads, and I just had this aha moment at one point that if you're born in 2000, you've been born into a culture with a very different social imaginary than we had in the 80s and the 70s. And one example would be homosexuality. When we were growing up, I don't know how many years apart we are, but when we were growing up, it was still an ick factor, right? And now even a student at LBC who might theologically disagree with it, they might not have that instinctual ick factor in the same way.
Right.
So, and I think what that does is it causes you to wrestle more with the text because you don't have that initial bias, right?
Yeah.
So, when we would read Romans 1, we're like, well, yeah. But if that ick factor is sort of taken off the table, then it does change things. And our students were born early 2000s at a time when really that influence of Judeo-Christian values in the West is really eroding.
Yeah.
And there's actually a book on gay liberation, the history of gay liberation, and I can send this so you can link this as a podcast. And the author was saying that there has to be gay liberation, and the interviewer, who's also a historian, said, I don't understand something. You just said that in the Greco-Roman culture this wasn't a problem. So why do you need liberation? And she said it because Judeo-Christian values took over the West. And so, I mean, and I was like, okay, that's at least she's honest, right? That as long as Judeo-Christian values have that influence on Western culture, even if you're not a believer, even if you don't know anything in Romans 1, you still might pick up certain ideas. Yeah. And now you don't have that.
That's right. We talked also before we came on about how different the shooting, the murder of Charlie Kirk is, primarily because of the graphic nature of that. And then also in this very same week, Iryna Zarutska in Charlotte being stabbed. And we watched that, saw the shock of her face after she was stabbed, notice she's bleeding, and she begins to crumple and fall into a corner. And everyone on the train around her getting up and walking away. That is just mind-boggling. And in one sense, I imagine those people were terrified of their own life.
Yeah,
this was apparently, and it is so, a random stabbing. And you probably just want to get out of there and save your own life. But these two things combined, these graphic pictures of murder, we know that murder happens all the time.
Yeah.
And most of the time we don't see it, thankfully. But we saw these two, Charlie Kirk's, live for some people. And the graphic nature of it and the public nature of it is different than things that we just hear about.
And even certain news outlets wanted to take these images down.
Right.
They wanted to take the videos down. And so, and I'll add, too, I think, while you have that, you also have the anniversary of 9/11.
Yeah.
And I'm also following the news of things heating up in Europe. With Russia sending drones over Poland. And you're like, Poland, World War? And so there's a lot to swallow right now, right? And this is where I think we always try to help our students understand, okay, we're Christians, how do we negotiate the city of man? And there's going to be evil.
Yeah.
And we're going to suffer. Right. And I think that's but we can watch other people suffer now in ways we couldn't before.
No, that's right. Think about, for most of human history, you would only know the suffering of those in your immediate circles, your village, your part of the city. And you would read about suffering around the world, but weeks after it happened in a black and white newspaper, or a storyteller, someone who came along, a herald, and told it. And we live in the day where every horrific thing in the world we can watch live in full color, and that has an impact on us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that might be where a lot of people are wrestling, and they're feeling this right now. And I think even the politicians, I've heard some senators and Congress people saying they're scared.
Yeah.
Because if you can shoot Charlie Kirk, you can shoot anybody. Right. I mean, who's safe? Yeah. And I think that's also a fear factor, right? Who's safe now? Right. They tried to shoot Trump. They shot this gentleman. Am I safe? And then am I safe on a train?
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah. It's not just a public figure. It can be a
Yeah.
random stranger.
And I think for us, some of our college students, they watch this video of the trail, and it happened on a college campus. Well, where am I watching it?
Yeah.
In my dorm room
Yeah.
at a college campus. So yeah, that makes sense that it would create a certain angst. And I think maybe part of what we're seeing too in sort of the political dialogue, if this is helpful, is that both sides are treating the debate like an existential crisis. And
What do you mean?
Both sides see that their definition of the way that they see the world, if they don't get everything, it could be the end of their existence.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the thing about America that's made America work has been compromise. It's not always good.
Right.
It gave us heinous things like the 3/5 Compromise and the Fugitive Slave Act, but it kept the bloodletting down, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't always do it because eventually we had a war. But there's always been this ability to sort of compromise, negotiate.
The question is, as far as we've gone, I'll make no bones about it, as far as the left has gone, with the push to transition children and the push for abortion up through the moment of birth, is there any way to compromise anymore on something?
That's it, right?
Yeah.
I think once you are at a point where you're defining what it means to be human, you can't compromise anymore.
No, right. I don't think we can budge on that, because as soon as we allow, who was it this week? A governor said, you don't get your rights from God, you get them from the government. And it's like, the Constitution.
Yeah. Even Jefferson knew it came from the Creator. Yeah.
Like, if we resort to granting human or personhood dependent upon certain achievements, we're going to see death come to us like we've never imagined before. Canada's already doing this, right? 4% of their population last year who died by medical assistance and dying.
Yep.
20,000 people. And it's like, how can we go down that road?
Yeah.
But again, we have to realize the foundation of our culture has been eroded. There are lots of people that have no problem saying we should not let elderly people who are, on their way to death use up medical resources, and anyone who doesn't want to have a baby shouldn't have it, and Nazis should die. So we're already moved away from this idea that sanctity of life is something we should all hold as a foundational belief that shouldn't have to be argued for.
Yeah. Well, once you move to a materialistic worldview, it just matter.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's just matter. And so why not? Why wouldn't you do that? And I think maybe unlike the Third Reich, it's just a little more sophisticated now, right? It's a different spin on it.
Yeah. Although this Third Reich was pretty sophisticated.
No, they had some spin on it. Oh yeah,
they put a nice polish on their
They did.
policies.
But they're today it just looks a little different. But you're right, and I think that's it. I think that's why we're all feeling this. And Mark, I find it interesting working with 20-somethings, because usually that's the most idealistic time in your life, and they're not.
No,
they're not. They're pessimistic. My joke is that they're the angry guys Muppets up in the balcony. They're just very cynical.
You'll have to explain what the Muppets are for the younger generation.
Well, Google it. But yeah, they definitely have that sort of edge to them in that way, right? Even the Christian kids.
Yeah.
That something's not right.
Right. Is this the death of free speech?
It's a big question.
Yeah.
I mean,
we've known for years that conservatives going to campuses can be assaulted, like it happened at Dartmouth a number of years ago, where someone had to be taken to the hospital. Yeah, I think it was a school administrator, a university administrator, protecting a conservative speaker who was invited in, but the crowds rioted. This is common all over America, where conservatives are invited to colleges and universities, and they are shouted down. They are protested. Tim Keller was going to be given an award by Princeton.
Yeah, the Kuiper Award, nonetheless.
And they
who's more Kuiperian than Keller?
Right? Yeah. But on the left, leftism is freely spoken at every college and university practically, and there's no threat whatsoever.
And what's fascinating about this story is that Charlie Kirk was sort of the one person who was on the right who was allowed to get away with saying some of this at the college campus,
right?
And have these conversations. But yeah, and I think too, Mark, the other thing is the way we communicate today. It's much easier to cancel somebody because it's not a conversation around the water cooler on the stoop. It's something you've posted, and then someone sends it to the HR director, and next thing you know, your opinion now has you on the unemployment line. Right. So it's even the way we're having those conversations. And because it's the zero-sum game, it can't just be, well, he disagrees with me. If it's my neighbor, he disagrees with me, but he's still going to cut my grass if I'm sick.
That's right.
Right. He's still going to shovel my lawn. Now it's just, I just read this. I don't know who you are, but I'm offended, and I'm gonna protest your company. And next thing you know, you're gone.
Right.
And so, like, what does we might have to have that conversation about what does freedom of speech look like in this environment.
Right.
So I think you're right. I mean, but anytime you kill somebody for what they say in that way, you do sort of erode that American experiment.
Yeah. Years ago, a disgraced apologist whose name I won't mention said something that always stuck with me. He said, it used to be that we believed that people were equal and ideas were unequal. Yeah. Some ideas were better than others. He said, now we live in an era where ideas are equal, but people are not. So if you are different than me, you don't have the same value as me. Everyone should have their own ideas. And yet it's kind of coming around full swing again to where your ideas and people are not equal. You're totally other than me, and therefore I can negate you as a person.
Yeah. Well, I remember the first time I heard the term microaggression.
Yeah.
I was like, what is that? I mean, this was like...
I committed one recently. I was with a student I didn't know, and she had a beautiful accent. And I said, where are you from? Which I didn't realize was a microaggression, but apparently it is. And it was just real curiosity where she was from. But yeah.
But I mean, so like in that, right? Like all of a sudden now that's a term. Right?
Yes.
20 years ago, that's not a term.
No.
So there is people are more sensitive to some of that stuff today, and that's changed.
Right.
And
that's where Carl Truman comes in, that we live in an era of individual expressivism. Is that the term he uses? Or emotional expressivism, where me and my feelings determine truth and are the most important thing. And whether you mean to or not, if you offend my feelings, then you have committed an act of aggression. Mm-hmm. I remember taking a class at Villanova almost 15, 20 years ago, and one of the professors was a radical postmodernist. And he had his dissertation, and I read it, even though I didn't have to. And the conclusion, I think it's on my shelf over there, the conclusion is that disagreement is violence. This is a brilliant man who left Villanova, went on to a large university in the Southwest, a recognized philosopher, but he embraced this idea of individual expressivism, that disagreeing with me is an act of violence. And I thought, that leaves us entirely then in the hands of a Hobbesian Leviathan who will determine what's acceptable speech and what is not. And you're only safe to do what Big Brother... the tones of this, that disagreement could become violence, the implications are terrifying.
And historically, unfortunately, you've seen people on both sides of the political spectrum do this, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, even the concept right and left, where does that come from? It comes from the French Revolution. The left-leaning people of the National Assembly sat on the left side of the room.
Interesting.
And the more monarchists sat on the right side of the room. So it goes back to there.
Isn't that the opposite of the Congress? I guess
it depends on whether you're watching TV or you're
facing the platform or on the platform.
Exactly. Yeah. But even that sort of concept, it goes back to that. So my question for you, even if I'm allowed to ask questions.
Feel free.
What do we do with this in apologetics, in talking about our faith, knowing there's sort of these new landmines laying around, knowing that we are talking to people who might have never heard anything we're interested in. They have a completely different news feed.
Yeah.
The only thing they know about, say, Charlie Kirk is something negative, or
Right.
the only thing they know about George Floyd is something negative. And you don't want to microaggress them or something like that. And so how do we have that conversation?
Yeah. I think it should start with the fact that we ought to be able to have conversations that are civil. And Charlie Kirk, you cannot say he was not civil. He invited people to come to microphones and to challenge him, ask a question, present a viewpoint. And he would debate, but he would debate not in an angry way, but in a logical way. And the reels that I saw, I mean, most of the time, those who stood on the opposite of an issue with him could not present an argument for their views, or did not realize that their views are inherently self-contradictory or irrational or unlivable. And that's one thing I teach in apologetics, is we know that all unbelief, rejection of the gospel and the Christian faith, is either self-contradictory, the same person that says, I believe everything came about through random process of time and chance and evolution, and I think we should treat one another with dignity. Well, that's contradictory. You can't have both. Or it's irrational, and one of the things Charlie Kirk did well was he pointed out errors in facts, that factual errors that people believed and showed the truth, or it's unlivable. You know, everyone should just do their own thing and everyone can have their own right and wrong. You can't actually live that way.
Right.
Because then you enter this Nietzschean nightmare of the Übermensch. Whoever's the strongest, most powerful, most aggressive will dominate, and that's the way it should be, you know, in an evolutionary worldview. So I think what is really sad about the assassination of Charlie Kirk is, even though people didn't like his positions, he encouraged constructive dialogue. And I think he won some people over by the fact that he didn't put them down. He respected them as individuals. And unfortunately, on the left, I don't see that willingness to have that conversation. They want to go right to canceling. If you cross a line of, you know, opposing transgenderism or wanting to put limits on abortion. And we need to be able to talk to one another and see one another as neighbor.
Yeah.
But also to realize there are limits to our agreement. And there are some things we should recognize are a threat to life and liberty. And that is anyone who's not going to acknowledge the inherent personhood of all human beings. We are all going to be in a place at some point in our lives where we can't fulfill the requirements of the atheistic, materialistic test for personhood. Yeah. And then it would be perfectly right in that mindset for someone to end our life. And yet none of us wants that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of like Foucault saying all truth is relative, but he doesn't want the Nazis back.
That's right.
Yeah. So, and you know, as I think about it as a historian, we already tried this experiment where we said that all men are created equal, but we didn't create a system that way.
That's right. Yeah.
And it took us, I love the line from Mark Knoll's book, Civil War, Theological Crisis. He said, it took America's theologians Ulysses S. Grant and Tecumseh Sherman to decide that one for us, which is just a great line, right? But it also meant 600,000 people dead to adjudicate that,
right?
And that didn't even solve the whole thing, right? So you're right. There's something there. There's a way this system has worked that has worked.
Yeah.
But I'm also wondering too, are we at a point now where there are a lot of people who no longer believe in the American experiment? That's something I wonder.
Yeah, what impact would that have?
Well, I mean, first of all, we call it the experiment. We sort of know that, okay, this is a democratic republic. It's an experiment, and I mean, you don't hear that language as much anymore. You hear it a lot in the 19th century. This idea that this is an experiment in republicanism, and can it work? Because most republics fail.
Right.
Historically, they failed. So it seems a bit audacious to think you're going to pull it off. And so I think that's the idea, that it's an experiment, which means we don't have the blueprint here. We're sort of working our way through it. That's the idea in the founding documents and in the Federalist Papers and stuff like that. It's a process. But I'm wondering, have we gotten to that point where yes, people go to the polls. Yes, people just, but somewhere down deep, they're just not sure they buy it anymore. I hope that's not the case, but I do worry about that.
Right.
I do
I mean,
worry about
people are
that.
still trying to come to the United States by the millions, so there's got to be something
Correct.
here
Exactly.
that they can't find elsewhere.
Well, right. And I
however
say this in
imperfect it
class,
is.
Russia doesn't have an illegal immigration problem, right? China doesn't have an illegal immigration problem.
Right.
If
North
North
Korea.
Korea does not. Yeah, only getting out.
Yeah.
And so the fact, you're right, Mark, the fact that that's actually an issue for Western Europe and the United States says something about the societies they've created.
That's right.
It does say something about that because you don't see Syrian refugees asking to go to Moscow. Yeah. So yes, I think they're. So I'm hoping that we can figure out how to live with a new communication medium without it tearing us apart. But I do wrestle, and I tell our students all the time, every generation of the church faces a new challenge.
Mm-hmm.
There's
That's
no
so
golden
true.
era.
No.
If Acts was the golden era, then Paul wouldn't have written the letters.
Mm-hmm.
Every generation has to sort of wrestle with how are we going to live as citizens in the city of man while being citizens of the city of God. And right now, such as a time as this, God has called us to live in this moment.
Yeah.
And to be faithful to kingdom ethics, even while all these other things are happening. But that's hard.
Yeah.
It's hard. And it's also depressing at times.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Any closing comments you'd like to make?
Well, one, I hope we're not over with the experiment. That would be one. I hope we can figure this out. I think what I said there, I think that's how I sort of sum this up. It's we have to feel the grief.
Mm-hmm.
We have to mourn. We can't just be stoic about it.
Right.
In the end, we realize that this happens. We can look at our history and see it's happened in the past. The other thing, too, I think it's really important for the listeners to get at, and I think this is a good lesson from history. Sometimes the city of man gets themselves into a mix and they don't know how to get themselves out.
And when you, just for those of you don't know, Mark's talking about the City of God, the book by Augustine from the 4th century, in which he compares, or he talks about how Christians live in the kingdom of God. He calls it the city of God, while also living in the city of man. And therefore, we have to negotiate being under Christ's lordship, having the Holy Spirit dwell within us, waiting for the return of the King, while at the same time living in a world that's dominated by forces that oppose God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But there are times in the city of man that the citizens are going to, or the statecraft, they're going to get themselves into a quandary they don't even know how to get out of.
Mm-hmm.
And World War I is a great example of that. And it could be this political polarization and hot temperature because of the medium is one of those things that at the present moment, and I actually heard some talking heads in the media say this, I'm not sure we know how to get ourselves out of this at this point. We keep saying we have to turn down the heat. We keep saying this, but I'm not sure anybody knows what exactly to do. Yeah. And that's a reality, I think, sometimes that the Bible talks about, God discomfiting people, right? Like discomfiting the Philistines. There is a sense of where the city of man can just be so discomfited by the situation they're in. They don't know how to fix it.
Right. Well, I look at the problem of crime in the United States, everything from drug cartels and crime in the cities and, trafficking and all that. It's like, can we ever get a handle on it? Will we ever be able to reel it in? It just seems so out of control that I think people must be increasing in fear about, will the government lose control of society? Will we end up in some kind of anarchy or pockets of anarchy, like we saw after George Floyd's death, the riots with that, was it Seattle or Portland?
Yeah. They created
a little zone.
A little commune, like in the French Revolution,
right? Which turned out to be horrific.
Bloodbath. Yeah.
Like I'm really concerned about if we don't have a shared idea of humanity, of dignity, of rights, of what is right and wrong. Is there any way to stop the spiraling of crime? Because if we are justifying some people's crime for whatever reason, that is going to only increase. You know,
Yes.
the idea of cashless bail and the idea of defunding the police and, you know, further scrutiny. I'm against police brutality, absolutely, but the opposition now to any use of force by police when they have such dangerous jobs, I feel like we're at a tipping point. Not to be a crisis monger, but can we ever come back to a time or a situation where there's more law and order, there's more peace, there's less fear?
Yeah. I mean, I lived in Philly. I lived in Chicago for a number of years. And I mean, you know, inner city shootings are a real thing. I mean, this goes on, right? And I've said this before. I would listen to the news in Chicago, and they would report the shootings like it was a box score at the Cubs game and the White Sox game. Yeah.
I read somewhere that only 17% of murders are ever solved in Chicago.
That wouldn't surprise me.
83 out of 100, they get away with it.
And even from some of the experience I had in Philadelphia, working with the government, that wouldn't surprise me. Yeah, and yeah, so so there is something there, right? There's this angst there, and if we fail, if we no longer really believe in this, you're right. Do you have some? And again, this just sounds like a bad dystopian novel, but and it doesn't have to be that way.
Right.
It doesn't have to be that way, but I think the one thing too, sort of end statements, is how can we as Christians be prophetic in this and not just go along with the trend?
Yeah, let's talk about that as we head toward wrapping up. We don't have to, but yeah, what can we do? I have some opinions on that. I really think we need to get back to, as you just mentioned, prophetic preaching. I think too much of American Christian preaching, and this is a generalization, is here's how to have a successful Christian life this week.
Yeah.
And that's necessary, but are pastors calling out the sins of our culture, the sins of our day? Are we calling people to repentance? As an apologist, are we sharing the gospel, calling sinners to repentance and warning them of the wrath to come?
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, as an apologist, I only see interest in actually doing that in a small percentage of Christians.
No, and I think so that's sort of in the church space. And I'm speaking to myself as well here. I think if we spent more time with our actual neighbors, embodied neighbors, than our virtual disembodied friends,
yes,
I think some of this would quiet down because all of a sudden you're not looking at this as an issue, but they're people.
Yeah.
I might disagree with them, but I've seen the brokenness on their face. I've walked with them through this. I don't agree with the decision they're making. I can't vote to support their decision they're making because everybody takes their values into the voting box. There's no neutrality. But there is something different about that approach, right? It was going to give you a certain posture that's different. I don't agree with this person, but you know what? The guy cuts my grass when my leg was broken. You know, that kind of thing, right? Or, you know, when my wife was laid up, his wife brought over cake. And that's sort of loving your neighbor as yourself, right? And so, again, I'm not saying throw your cell phones out. You know, the internet is the equivalent of backmasking from the 80s. But
build a bomb shelter.
And wear a tinfoil hat and keep your phone in the microwave. No, but to be intentional in saying that if this is the only place I'm really engaging the public square and not at the grocery store, not at the park, not in these other places, or not just out in front of my yard, you can see where you can get caught up into this. So that's a much more practical, lived sort of space that we can do. And if Keller's talked about this, right? Rosario Butterfield's talked about this, like the art of hospitality.
That's right.
That there is some, we've lost that.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also when it comes to knowing those who are opposite from us, learning to have discussions where you don't pull your punches when it comes to an issue you believe is true or right, but you recognize this is a person, and I want to persuade them. I want to convince them through the force of my argument, not through the force of my fist or my baseball bat. And to be willing to take long-term view of, let me have a relationship with this person, have regular conversations, and see if we can move each other on the needle when it comes to this issue, or for better understanding, so that we see others as human beings. I read Doug Murray's book a few years ago, The Madness of Crowds.
Mm-hmm.
And he
Yeah.
talks about what happens when people start to get into this mob mentality
Yeah.
and they don't want to listen to the truth. They don't want to hear facts. They've already made up their mind. And again, that's one of the things I appreciated about Charlie Kirk was he often brought facts to the discussion that people were completely unaware of. And many times it caused them to think, and we can do that. We have the power of the truth as Christians when it comes to the gospel and the Christian faith and the Word of God, where there's power in that if we do it the right way.
Yeah, and so and there the crowd now used to be it was the people on the street with you, in the barricades.
Yeah.
Now it could be anyone around the world. It could be
That's
thousands of people around the world, and that's your group. And I, maybe this story helps. I have a good friend. I'm not as friendly with him now as I used to. We live distance apart, but he was Muslim, and we used to have great theological conversations. Right. Sometimes it was he would tell me what a Muslim belief is or something like that. And for years we would just discuss these various issues, things like that. But because of that, and it wasn't sort of like, I'm trying to sell him a pup and see if I can get him to become a Christian. It was just, we worked together, we had conversations, and we had coffee together, we talked together. But the relationship grew to enough where we got to a point in a conversation where I could say, all right, I've heard everything we've talked about for years now. Break it down for me. What keeps you from being a Christian? And to be able to ask a Muslim that question,
Yeah.
like I realized, like if it wasn't for those years of neighborly
That's right.
relationship, I would have never gotten to that point to
That's
ask
right.
that question. And I think we can ask questions like that with people we disagree with, but we have to be willing to maybe be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And do that.
Absolutely.
And so if we're not countercultural that way, and again, I think if people don't see community in the church, then they're,
No,
yeah.
that's
If
right.
they see the church just as divided as the culture, which
Yeah.
unfortunately I'm afraid is the case, we've lost our prophetic witness.
That's right. One last thing I was thinking as you're talking was, I think in all of this as Christians, in our desire to build bridges and relationships, we cannot refrain from calling evil what it is.
Yep.
And this is another area. I've heard this many times through the years. I feel like many Christians think if I bring up sin or disagree with this person, or they find out I think that their lifestyle or their choices are sinful, I'm going to ruin my witness with them. And some Christians are so concerned. They want to see someone saved, but they don't often realize God calls us to call wickedness what it is,
Yeah.
and not to soft pedal it. And so I would look at this hateful execution or assassination of Charlie Kirk. It's okay to say that was wicked, that was
Yeah.
evil.
Yeah.
And I want this man to get justice. I hope in the process he comes to know Christ.
Yeah.
But as the psalmist says in Psalm 139, slay the wicked, O God.
Yeah. Well, in our culture, though, Mark, there are certain things you're allowed to say is evil.
Yeah, that's right.
You're allowed to call Hitler evil.
Yes.
Right? Because
Fascists,
that's
Nazis, yeah.
And you're allowed to call a school shooting evil.
Yeah.
Right? Nobody's going to.
Everybody agrees on
Right.
that.
So there's certain places where, okay, we have common ground. We're allowed to say that. But then there's these other areas, well, we're not allowed to say those things are evil. Right. That's just who they are, or that's just who I am. And again, it's a more humanistic definition of evil, holy, set apart, stuff like that. And you can get to those conversations, but you've first got to do probably the hard work to. I met a missionary in France when I was there, and he said something. He said, it probably takes about 7 years to have a French person come to faith after building a relationship with them.
Wow.
Because of the culture of Frenchness, which is very closed off, the secularism, the sort of anti-religion that their republic had to kind of create, and anti-Catholicism.
It is forbidden to forbid.
Yeah, and I thought, wow, like that's you're playing the long game.
Yeah.
Right, you're playing the long game, and these people are there. We just live here. Yeah. That could be where we are, even in America, more so.
Yeah, and I think there's, all the talk these days about toxic empathy. I think those who are not in Christ have borrowed the idea of Christian love and emptied it of its edge, because love loves that which is good. If you truly love someone, you hate that which harms them or threatens them. And some Christians are so scared to call something evil or sinful that the Bible does because they're afraid to lose their testimony, when in fact it might be that very thing that brings that unbeliever who's involved in that to say, wait a second, that's sin, that's evil. God's word says this is bad. Maybe I ought to reconsider. And I don't think we can pull back and fail to call evil what it is, sin what it is. First of all, renouncing it within ourselves, but that doesn't mean that we don't ever denounce it in the
culture
public.
and the outside. Yeah.
Well, I hope this was helpful for you as we wrestle through these issues of evil in our day, and may God grant us a biblical mind, the heart of Christ as we deal with these things. If you enjoyed this video and would like to find more resources on apologetics, go to apologeticsforthechurch.org.